Hey everyone, Kyle here. Going to do a little training on radio communications for this Tuesday's online training video. This is a presentation that Colin Goodson and I made a couple years ago, so you may have seen it before, but I think it's pretty good and covers a lot of the radio basics that are good for new people and also veteran members of the fire department alike. So that being said, we'll get going here. Just starting with some basic terminology. The first one is base station, which is a fixed radio, like the one that we have in the dispatch room upstairs at the fire department, or like Adams School has now in their office area. Then there's mobile radios, which are of course what we have in the trucks, what the chief officers have in their vehicles. And they have similar output power to the base stations, normally 25 to 50 watts. Then we have portable radios, the old style, the PR400s. There are some HT1250s, all Motorola brands, and they're typically limited to 5 watts transmit power, so you're going to have a lot less transmit capabilities, but also less receiving capabilities, just because of the size of the antenna. Then we have pagers, which are the Motorola devices that we carry on us to be alerted to calls. Those are receive only, so you cannot transmit with those. Those only alert you to calls. Then we have Hancock Regional Communication Center, Hancock RCC, whatever you want to call it. And that is the place there in Ellsworth, and they dispatch us and record times and so on. And we have repeater, which is a device that has both a receiver and transmitter, and they get coupled together and basically expands the coverage of typical radios. And we'll cover that here in a couple different slides later on. Keying up is the act of pushing the push to talk button on the radio. Doing so transmits the audio from you over the air. Good thing to note with that is that when you're pushing that button, you're not receiving it at all, so you'll not hear anyone until you take your hand off that button. PL tone is a silent tone that gets transmitted with your voice. That helps us cut down on interference and allows the radio to not break squelch and cause unnecessary noise. Squelch just suppresses the speaker essentially on the radio, so that you're only hearing what you're meant to hear and not radio static. Scan, that allows us to cycle through channels listening for any radioactivity. Frequency, commonly referred to as a channel, it's a numerical designation for what channel you're operating a radio on. Essentially, of course, Cascade Fire is 154.385 megahertz. And that's what the repeater broadcasts on, and what we're talking on, we're on a talk around channel. Simplex operations, which we'll expand more on a little bit, is when one radio transmits and then others within the receiving range receive that transmit on one frequency. There's no other radios involved other than the radio transmitting and the radio receiving it. And duplex operations, this is how a repeater operates. It's when the radio transmits on one frequency, and then that's received by a repeater and rebroadcasted on a different frequency, which is expanding basically the operating capabilities. So this is how a repeater works. So typically you put that repeater on some sort of tall thing here in this diagram. And then you have antenna system and a controller, that's the repeater itself, on that tower. So the way this works is this guy over here on the left is talking into the repeater on frequency B, and then that repeater is then rebroadcasting that on frequency A, which allows the guy on the right to be able to hear that signal even though they're talking on portables and they have this big tall thing in the way. So set to repeater mode, it receives on frequency A and transmits on frequency B, and this greatly increases your capability as far as range. One thing to note though is in our system here, our repeater is at the dump on a small tower, and it doesn't have any power backup. So if you are in a situation where the power's out, then you cannot use that repeater. You have to make sure you switch your radio to talk around, which then circumvents the repeater, but your range is then decreased. So in a repeater system, the range of the whole system is limited by the weakest signal, in this case portables, and specifically their ability to talk into the repeater. So the ability for them, when they transmit, to reach the repeater's receive antenna. So we have a problem with that. For instance, down on the waterfront in Castine, where we're at a much lower elevation, we're mostly talking into the hill and our signal can't reach into the repeater. So our repeater coverage down on the waterfront is not good. And that's a function of the repeater's receive antenna. So portable, this is of course the talk around that we mentioned. And this is a simplex operation. This is strictly radio to radio. And this is what we do when the power's out at the dump and the repeater isn't working. Set all the radios to talk around, and then they talk directly to each other. But of course, that means we're limited to, again, the weakest link being the portables, transmitting at 5 watts on a small antenna. That means that you have to be, relatively within line of sight, if not maybe a little bit more, to be able to talk to whoever you're trying to reach. Basic radio operations. When you're making a radio call, you state the name or maybe the call sign of the station you're calling, followed by who you are. That way they'll hear their name over the radio and their ears will kind of tune in and start to listen. So if you're calling Hancock RCC, for instance, and you're in Engine 6, you'd say Hancock RCC from Castine Engine 6, Ron responding with the crew of 4. So you're saying who you're calling, who you are, and then your short, concise message. We use plain language, so no 10 codes at all. Of course, 10-4 is fine, but beyond that, you want to stick to plain language as best you can, even if the other parties on the countywide system are not. So to transmit, before you do so, you listen to the channel you want to talk on. Make sure no one else is talking on it, so you don't walk on them or double, meaning you don't try to transmit at the same time as someone else. So before you transmit, listen on the frequency, take another listen, and then go ahead. So you press that push to talk button, you key up, then you wait a second, and then you talk. If you push that push to talk button and begin talking at the same time, then the whole system hasn't had a chance to begin transmitting, and the first part of your transmission is going to get cut off. So push that button, give a quick 1-second count, and then you can begin talking. So a couple different radio etiquette type items. You want to turn off your pager to avoid feedback. So if you've been alerted to the call and your pager's on, you go to get talking on the radio, then just like a speaker system where you put a microphone in front of a speaker and you get that loud screeching feedback, the same thing happens with radios. If you have another radio that's listening on the frequency that you want to talk on, you're going to get that feedback. And you don't turn portables on inside of a truck for that same reason. Another example of that is if you're standing around on a call and a couple different people have portable radios on, you want to make sure that if you transmit that everyone else is covering their speakers so that you don't get that screeching feedback sound. And then when you're receiving a transmission, you want to confirm it back to make sure that you heard it properly. So for example, if Division 1 is calling Engine 6 and they want their water pressure on the hand line increased, go something like this: Engine 6 from Division 1, can you increase the pressure on our hand line? So Engine 6 heard that. To make sure that they receive that properly, they'll respond and say, Engine 6 copies, we're going to increase the pressure on the hand line. That way, if they somehow misinterpret or misheard it, then Division 1, hearing that, gives a chance to call them back and correct them. Something else to know is you don't have to shout into the radio. Just hold that microphone 2 to 3 inches from your mouth and speak normally. If you shout, then you're going to over-modulate or distort your voice, and no one's going to be able to understand what you're saying. Of course, when we're on the radio, we want to practice professionalism. So keep in mind that when you speak on the radio, anyone with a scanner or an internet connection, for that matter, can hear what you're saying. That's not to intimidate anyone, but it's to It's to make sure that you're really thinking about what you're saying. You're going to be concise. So have that message in your head beforehand. So don't use slang or excessive pause words. Again, make sure you know what you're going to say and be concise when you say it. So have a purpose for transmitting. Typically there are 3 reasons. You're giving important information, giving instruction, or for life safety. One little kind of mnemonic you can use when you're talking on the radio is CAN, C-A-N. That stands for conditions, actions, and needs. So when you're calling on the radio to make a report, you're going to report current conditions, actions as far as what you're doing, and needs. So what you need for that particular call, and that can go for fire or EMS. So just keep that in mind when making a report over the radio. So our typical ideal scenario for a call is that we're toned out by Hancock RCC. Then one person acknowledges the tone on County Fire. This is Hancock County Fire West. We're now on the Waldo Tower. So there's a small correction there. And typically with a medical call, we want that person to be an EMS member. That way, if no EMS members sign on, it gives Hancock a chance to give us another tone and get some more folks responding. So one person acknowledges on County Fire, and then all responding apparatus will also sign on Hancock and then switch to our casting repeater. And the first arriving unit will let Hancock know that we're on scene in a quick size up. And you can even do a size up on a medical call. Just give a quick description of the house so that other responding units can find it a little bit quicker. Whoever establishes IC will let Hancock know if they take command or if command ever changes hands. And then all of our communications from that point on are on the casting repeater, talk round, or whether the frequency is determined by the IC. Typically this is going to be casting repeater for 90% of operations. Casting talk around will work better in some scenarios, and typically the IC will let everyone know when that is going to be used. And when we're done with the call, one unit will let Hancock know when everyone's done clearing the scene. Preferably the IC will do this. And then one apparatus lets Hancock know when the units are back in the station ready to go. So no need for all units to call Hancock and let them know they're leaving the scene or back in quarters. This is a quick blurb from the IF report on fire service radio communications. Basically what it's saying is for fire ground, active work and fire operations, that simplex communication is a lot better because other people can act as human repeaters. We're not relying on one piece of equipment to relay a message. So for example, if we're on casting repeater with a work and fire and something happens to the repeater or anything else, when you're talking on the radio, you're on a different transmit frequency. So if people if the repeater goes down, then chances are no one's going to hear a message if something happens to that repeater. So in these life safety scenarios, it's better to be on talk around, because if you call Mayday inside, then chances are you have a dozen firefighters and other apparatus, everything else on scene that gives a chance to hear that message. Maybe even someone else that's interior that can then relay your message to the IC. So we really want to think about simplex communications as the gold standard in work and fire life safety applications. This is just a quick note on analog versus digital. If you're interested, you can come back and pause this slide and kind of give it a quick look over, but it doesn't really pertain to us. We're on analog communications and probably will be for the foreseeable future. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We can answer that and maybe review it in next week or so on.